Hey everyone, this is Luke Thomas. I'm the founder of Friday, and we're building tools to make it easier to work remotely. And welcome to another episode of Remote Rants, where I find random articles on the internet and we break them down and we talk about it in hopes that you and I both learn a thing or two. So, in today's episode, we are going to discuss this article I found in Poynter called How to Deal with Micromanagers in a COVID-19 World. This is an interesting article, and the idea of micromanagement is a frequent topic of conversation when working remotely. So I thought it was worth kind of digging into in a bit more detail. So without further ado, let's break down this article. So here we go. I'm going to read through it and take breaks and offer some commentary as we go. From the day I created a newspaper for my middle school in ninth grade, I was hooked. All my subsequent summer workshops, internships, and extracurriculars were done to help me reach my ultimate goal at the time: attend journalism school at Northwestern. My teenage self never would have guessed I'd end up on the trajectory my career is on now, a unique combination of editorial and tech at not only one tech company, but three: a startup I founded by one of the first Google employees, LinkedIn, and now Prezi. While my plans didn't end up exactly as I expected, it's been a decision I've never looked back on. A big part of that is because the people I've gotten to work with, both in an editorial capacity and cross-functionally, including engineers, product managers, marketers, data scientists, and more. At each of the companies I've been at, I've been lucky enough to have worked only with managers who embody the traits that most would agree define a truly great manager: empathetic, empowering, supportive, and trusting, among others. But I know my situation isn't the norm. As many of us enter another month of quarantine, we're experiencing new ways of working and living that come with its own set of challenges. Quote, staying on top of the daily news for the coronavirus pandemic is a challenge, and newsroom leaders want to be successful, said Carrie Holt, a digital executive producer at Local Now. Holt has experienced her fair share of micromanagers during her 20-year career in news and digital media, said the tendency to micromanage may be elevated by the pandemic. Every newsroom leader wants their coverage of COVID-19 to be the best, lead ratings, and win awards, said Holt. The pressure is on for editorial teams to deliver phenomenal results, and it can be difficult for a manager to stand back and let that happen. Luckily, there are tips for how to set expectations and communicate clearly so that you can operate efficiently and ideally on your own schedule. Just a quick pause. I constantly mention this in other rants, but as I've mentioned before, and I'll mention in the future, the key to making remote work is all about really being flexible. It's about being able to build your workday around times when you're most productive, whether that's early in the morning or maybe later in the day. It's the principle of flexibility in remote work is critical if you want to make remote work successful. Anyway, back to the article. One of the biggest reasons that managers micromanage is due to lack of trust, says Ibu Cesarpar, CEO of Remote How, a platform powered by and for leaders of distributed teams. For employees, it's important to ask the manager to be explicit about what they expect of you. I think I'd like to take a break and just offer maybe a critical perspective here. So, as I just said, one of the biggest reasons that managers micromanage is due to lack of trust. I would disagree with that. I don't necessarily think it's lack of trust. I think it's lack of visibility into what's going on. And sure, if you have a really strong working relationship with someone, it can help reduce the ambiguity, because you kind of just assume, or based on past experience, that they know what they're doing. But even in great relationships, there needs to be some visibility. And so I'm not convinced it's trust. I think it's more of a lack of awareness into what's going on. Anyway, fast forward. For employees, it's important to ask the manager to be explicit about what they expect of you. I think this is a two-way street. I think that putting the entire burden on a manager to be explicit about what they expect of you is kind of like that. I'm not a big fan of that, because I think at work, you should really try to take some be accountable for your own actions. And so being explicit about expectations is a two-way street. And so anyway, here we go. To build up this trust, you should encourage the manager to set clear goals and priorities. Once again, I think this is something that should happen both with the employee and the manager. It can be daily, weekly, or monthly, so we know what should be delivered and what are the deadlines. Okay, once again, think about it this way. You as an employee can do your part to reduce the ambiguity that, that causes this lack of quote unquote trust or visibility. For example, why is it completely up to the manager to understand and to set these clear goals and priorities? Isn't that kind of micromanagement, right? This needs to be a back and forth. And so I would encourage you, if you are an employee, you should go above and beyond to share what you're working on. So that, because if you don't want a manager to ask you what you're working on, well, then you should probably tell people what you're working on, right? Send a weekly email outlining what you accomplished. Do a daily stand-up. Ideally, this is something that this goes both ways. Anyway, back to the article. For managers, it's also important to understand how your team best operates. After all, micromanaging is ultimately in the eye of the beholder, says Poynter leadership faculty member Cheryl Carpenter. Totally agree with this. It's in one hand, someone may not think that you're micromanaging. On another, people think you might be. And so this, I would argue, the only solution to this is to develop clear expectations for how people should stay aware and give people visibility into what's going on. Because if you just set the expectation, you can eliminate a lot of these issues. Anyway, what may seem like a regular check-in to you as a manager might seem like micromanaging to them, Carpenter said. It's about knowing your people and knowing what level of independence they expect, and frankly, if they've earned it. Once again, I kind of disagree with this. I think it's about setting a clear expectation. What is the minimum amount of information you should be sharing? This is why daily stand-ups, weekly updates are a wonderful routine that remote teams should do. Because what you're doing is you're saying, hey, this is what we do here, and we would like you to do this. And if you don't do it, well then, the manager has every right to ask you what you're working on. As a manager, you are responsible. Your output is the output of your team. And so that is your job. And so if you as an employee do not set your leader up for success here, they have every right to ask you what you're working on. That's my personal take. Anyway, if you're still feeling micromanaged even after priorities are established, Andrian Hopkins, Presi's Director of Human Resources, and my dedicated HR partner to help me work through difficult workplace situations, recommends taking a step back and using a prioritization framework like the Eisenhower Matrix to double-check that you're accomplishing the tasks you and your manager are aligned on. There is negotiation that needs to happen, right? This is maybe a topic in a one-on-one meeting or in some other type of, sync-up conversation, right? This is an example of a negotiation that should happen between the employee and the manager. And ideally, this is documented in some capacity so it removes the ambiguity. Because oftentimes, if you have a meeting, let's say you go through this Eisenhower matrix and you leave the meeting and you have nothing that persists and is saved over time, well, then you are going to run the issue of misaligned expectations. Anyway. Quote, it's easy to lose track of prioritization and keep in line with what your manager is looking for when everyone is remote and stressed. Once you've set priorities with your manager, products like Slack, Zoom, Trello, and Google Docs make it much easier to share updates and collaborate with colleagues. Technology is even more critical as this work-from-home experiment evolves into a more permanent solution for some workers. At Prezi, we use Prezi Video for both asynchronous and live video meetings to keep in touch with one another. Most of us will be familiar with live video meetings. Asynchronous communication is likely less common in your organization or newsroom, but it may be something you want to bring up as a new way of working with your boss. And just as an aside, asynchronous communication is when you communicate without the need for both parties, the sender and the receiver, to be present at the same exact moment in time. This is not rocket science. Email is a form of asynchronous communication. Writing docs in Google Docs or adding, comments in Trello. This is asynchronous communication. So don't overcomplicate this here. Anyway, async is communication that happens at different times, meaning that you shouldn't expect and likely won't get responses right away. It allows for more flexibility in your work schedule, time to support family and friends, and the ability to optimize your efforts and skills, according to Samantha Lee, a community advocate at GitLab, the world's largest all-remote company. For journalists, async communication could be especially useful for longer-term or collaborative projects. I think, from my perspective, it would be useful to see an example of what this looks like. Anyway, continuing. The impact technology has had in aiding remote work is undeniable, but it can only go so far without a proper foundation. That's where documentation comes in. With teams spread out and working from bedrooms, bathrooms, and home offices in different time zones, it can be difficult for managers and teammates to keep track of who is working on what and when. Yes, totally agree. To provide more transparency, news and media companies should embrace a combination of asynchronous communication and documentation. It's kind of the same thing. Said GitLab's Lee. Documentation and async work go hand in hand. With good documentation, questions are already answered and processes are documented, so managers don't need to worry about being available to train or answer questions, Lee said. For employees, async work combined with documentation allows teams to become self-sufficient, effective, and reach a better work and life balance. Totally agree. The thing I would just point out is that documentation is a form of asynchronous communication, but the beauty of documentation is that it establishes some some guardrails for how work should be done. This can be at a company level, this could be at a team level, it could be at a process level. But the idea is that, what you're trying to do is eliminate the variance in a common or regularly occurring process at work. Next section. We're all in a situation that has turned our lives upside down in different ways. One way to combat any additional stress is by having empathy for one another. I'm not a huge fan, I get this, but this is kind of a vague, this is very vague. And so my hope is when people write articles like this, they get more specific. Yes, people generally know that being empathetic is important, but how does that actually work? What are some takeaways? Continuing. Managers are responsible for story accuracy and quality control under extremely tight deadlines. The pressure is on to make the right decisions and they're feeling the stress too, Local Now's Holt said. Rajendrani Mukap. I'm sorry. I have no idea how to pronounce this. An executive editor at C&EN Brand Lab has been called a micromanager before. According to this person, who has 2 direct reports and 20 freelancers who report to her, she is naturally attentive to details. But after receiving feedback that this came off as micromanaging, she made adjustments that allowed her to let go of some of the details and focus on the bigger picture. One thing I realized is I never gave my direct reports the quote, why. Why am I constantly in their business? Why am I asking them, she says. I'm a person who needs constant, clear communication. The fear of balls being dropped is what keeps me constantly asking. But if you communicate clearly and regularly with me, that things are under control or things are going off rail, but you say, I have it and I've got it under control, then I'm fine. Another way to have empathy is to assume best intentions. In recent years, I dealt with a boss who would ask for my opinion, then question me because a manager in another department may have suggested something different, Holt says. It's likely he was leaning on that person because they worked together in the past. I finally told my boss, I know it's hard for you, but I need you to trust me. Opening up and telling him how I felt made a difference. After that, my boss stopped second-guessing me. He would only ask questions if he truly didn't understand my reasoning behind my decision. Bottom line, he didn't even realize he was doing it until I brought it to his attention. As was in Holt's case, having an honest conversation can be all it takes to fix an otherwise difficult situation. When we sense that we are being micromanaged, we get annoyed, frustrated, and we easily fall into assumptions. She thinks I am not working or not working enough, Prezes Hopkins explained. Point out examples and the impact on you, your work, and your productivity. Having the conversation gives you and the manager the chance to build a stronger relationship and collaboration. Poynter's Carpenter recommends reflecting on 3 things before approaching your manager. 1. Ask yourself, what's this person missing that I can control? Inquire of yourself the behavior to change. Micromanaging comes from when the person isn't getting enough information. This is an awesome quote. So what can you do to bridge the gap, right? How can you give, your team leader who is responsible for the team's output the information they need to be able to succeed? I would argue, once again, the onus is on you as the employee to do something. This is absolutely a negotiation between the employee and the manager. But is there something you can do as an individual to help bridge the gap? Number 2, understand the context. Is this person normally a micromanager? Is this person micromanaging this project? It might be an agenda that you don't know about. Ask them, tell me about the outcome of this project and what you hope for and what your worries are about. 3, make a plan for a difficult conversation. When you let your boss know that you don't feel like she trusts you, you usually get someone's attention, Carpenter said. Trust is a big word. If they say they don't trust you, you have to be poised in the moment and ask them how you can reassure them. I think from my perspective, what I would encourage you to do if you do have a difficult conversation about this is bring examples. It is not useful. It is not a useful exercise to go to your manager and to say, hey, I feel like you're micromanaging me, and to not provide crystal clear evidence that supports your case. Additionally, I would encourage you to use the word feel, right? So what you're trying to convey is you're trying to convey that this is how I interpreted this action or this behavior from you. Behavior can be changed. And also, it's perfectly fine to feel a certain way. This gives the manager or, the micromanager the ability to clarify their rationale and their reasoning. Treat this as a conversation. I would strongly encourage you to A, bring examples, B, speak and talk in terms of I feel this way because of these reasons. I think that can go a long way. And then, gives the person time to explain themselves. Perhaps there's a way that you could have, once again, bridged the gap. Anyway, final sentence. Sarpar perhaps summarizes it best. It all comes down to trust and empowering people to take the ownership so they feel accountable. This is the best way for how we can all get rid of micromanagement. And I would just like to wrap up this episode of Remote Rants by saying, if you set crystal clear expectations so that information flows on a regular basis between the manager and the employee, you can eliminate a lot of these issues. Micromanagement is an absence, as the article says. Micromanaging comes from when the person isn't getting enough information. And when you're remote, you don't get a lot of information. Before, you may be in the office. You could easily stop by someone's desk and ask them what's up. You could run into someone walking down the hall. When you're remote, you don't have all these data points. And so you need to go above and beyond to share this information on a regular basis. It needs to be a habit. So anyway, I hope this has been useful. I enjoyed the article for the most part. I think it's a topic worth discussing. But I think, we need to move beyond just saying you need to trust people more. There needs to just be a little bit more substance here. So anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.